Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar today. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Voices, and this, as you know, probably is one of the many webinars we do. And we often talk about people who are trying to make a difference globally, nationally, and locally. But often we also interview people who are locally or globally involved in the arts and literature, in order that we can learn from them and find out what they're doing in case other people are interested in doing that as well. And today we're interviewing Roger, not Robert, I know him very well, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, but Roger Penfound, who was a BBC producer, shared an office with me, in fact, and then went freelance and decided on retirement, a word he doesn't use, that he would write a novel, and he's now written 4. So we're going to talk to him in a sec. Anyhow, let's begin the webinar. Anyhow, Roger, thank you, for joining us today. Maybe you could tell us a bit. I mean, I know you, as I said, we've shared an office for, some years, and they were fun times. So I know quite a bit about you, but a lot of people won't know about your background and, where you came from and, how you got into the BBC and so on. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, you're quite right. We spent, I think, about 25 years together working in the BBC at the then BBC Open University Centre, which moved up to Milton Keynes. And we spent a lot of time in that quite innovative environment, creating educational programs. But before that, I'd go right back the way back to childhood. I bought my first video camera from the John Lewis store in Welwyn Garden City when I was 8. I borrowed a bit of money from my parents and got my first clockwork video camera. I got interested in making movies then, and I got to University of East Anglia, and started the Film Society and the Television Society. So it was clearly in my blood. And when it came to jobs afterwards, I secured a job in the BBC as a programs operations manager. That's putting radio programs on air. Working at the World Service, which was very exciting, and a lot of international news and international groups of people to work with. And I got a lucky break, which enabled me to move into production there. So my particular claim to fame I was on the night that Turkey invaded Cyprus, and had to virtually single-handedly manage the news production for the next morning. And then, much to the surprise of the people at the World Service, I said, well, actually, I don't want to stay here. I want to go to the Open University. And they said, why do you want to go there? I said, because I want to learn to make television programs. And at that time, the Open University was the only department training new people. So went there. 25 years later, the relationship between the BBC and the Open University finished. Rather traumatized by that, I must say, but it happened. And then I set up my own business called Performance Media, which carried on tradition of educational program making, corporate program making. That was great until 2010. And if you remember 2010, the election, Labour lost, the Tories came in, austerity began. And all of the people who provided our client base, schools, education authorities, public sector, the money went. Overnight, the money went, and I saw the end in sight. So I started to think that sometime soon I'm going to have to retire, but what am I going to do? I didn't like the idea of being...
Let me stop you and just go through what you did, because I want to go through it step by step if I can. I remember the days when we worked together, and that was great. And you did a lot in the BBC OU. You did something as well, quite a lot in Performance Media, the company you set up. But what is interesting, I think, for people is, you then decided you wanted to write, which is sort of a big difference. What made you decide, after all those years of television production, that you wanted to write a novel?
I think that when you're making television programs, you're telling a story. It could be a documentary story. In my case, it often was. And you're wanting to communicate to an audience. And that's the joy of what we did. We communicated to an audience, we told a story, we got very emotionally involved in the stories we were telling. I know you did, Francis, you were very involved in political stories. I know you got very emotionally involved in those stories, me with the sort of programs I was making. And I was looking for something that would continue that, but I didn't want to be involved in the big organizational scene anymore. We'd both been through that in the BBC. I was looking to be much more independent. And the idea of sitting in my room writing, but having a focus for that writing, was something that excited me.
So did any of the skills you learned as a BBC producer help you when you were writing? Were they transferable?
Well, I think the managing time skill, which everybody has to learn one way or another, because writing really does require you to manage your time carefully, and to have a process for writing. You can't just say, I'm going to write a book. Yeah, I'll get it done someday. You've actually got to sit down and write that book. The other thing was, yes, writing. I've always enjoyed writing. I mean, in the BBC days, it was writing scripts, and it was writing scripts to a brief. Not as creative as I would have liked. And we worked with our academic colleagues in the Open University, so there was a lot of consensus. A very interesting word these days. We had to reach consensus to produce programs that everybody wanted to watch. So this was, I used to write stories as a youngster. I'm not sure I ever finished them, but I found some of them in the attic a few days ago. It's quite strange looking back at them. So there clearly was some little spark there which made me want to write. But it took till another 40, 50 years later that I had the opportunity. I could see this time opening up, and I thought, now I must use this time. This is the opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do.
So, I mean, when you decided you wanted to write, I mean, what was the motivation around it? I mean, having the skills are one thing, but having the motivation is another. Was it you wanted to tell a story? Was it you wanted to create a reading community? Or did you want to make money?
Well, yes, I mean, all of those things. I think there are three reasons for writing. One is you want to write. You actually want to sit down and you want to get your ideas on paper because something inside you is driving you to do that. The next thing is you want to communicate. If you've written something and it's got some emotion in it, some experience, a story, you want other people to read that. And you actually want some feedback from them, because that's one of the exciting things about writing. People want to tell you what they think of what you've written. So that's good. The third thing is maybe you could make some money out of it. That's the tricky one. Yes, it does work. There are some people who are earning six-figure sums out of their self-published writing. That's not me. I sell about 10 or 12 books a day on a self-published basis, and I cover my costs. Now, I'm hoping it will get bigger. We can talk about that later. This is after 5 years of writing. So, that third one, becoming a Jeffrey Archer or whoever you want to become, that's not guaranteed. But the other two pretty much are. You can write these days and you can reach an audience. So the first, and that for me is very fulfilling in its own right.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute. But I mean, when you started writing, I mean, you've written 4 novels now, but when you started your first one, I mean, how did you do it? Did you sort of write your first sentence and then say, oh, heck, where do I go now? Well, what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, there was a story I wanted to tell. This was a family story. I can go into the details of that later, but it was a story about 2 men who hated each other bringing up a child. And so I saw myself writing this emotional psychological drama. Sorry about that, Ding. I saw myself writing this emotional psychological drama. When I came to do it, I found that actually it was pretty tedious sitting down writing a psychological drama. I had to create backstories to explain why characters were doing things. I mean, characters did odd things as I sat down and wrote my first draft. And I found that I had to write a backstory for my characters to understand why they did as they did. And so this story emerged. What I thought would be something anchored in a small amount of time took on a past and a future. And to answer your real question, sorry, yes, I did. I sat down and I did plan. No, I did plan, but not as much as I would plan now. I sat down and I started writing, and I saw what came out, and sometimes I was quite surprised by what came out.
You talked about how you develop the characters, and we'll look at that, but you also, have to get the idea in the first place. And in that book, it's quite interesting. You got it from your mother, didn't you?
Yeah, my mum told me a story about her childhood. This would have been before the Second World War, when her mother had died, and she spent time living with her aunt in very rural Suffolk. And there was a story which the family didn't talk about very much, but as I got a bit older, I was told the story where her aunt and her husband had lived as a a young couple in a fairly sort of simple life, and a young, very successful man from the Midlands came to lodge with them because he had, I think he had breathing problems that that had been sustained earlier in his life. And so he came to live with them, and he had all the attributes of the sort of life that my mother's auntie would have liked. He had wealth. He could talk easily. He was a good-looking man. Anyway, they ended up having an affair, and as happened in those days, things that went on behind closed curtains weren't revealed to the outside world. So it ended up with the three of them living together, and her actual husband, well, there was a child that Artie became pregnant, and a child was born, and husband, whose name was Jed, took on the role of father, even though the father was actually a lodger. And they decided, all three of them, to live together, and people accepted that. People didn't question it. Then 5 years later, Auntie died of a very virulent cancer, leaving the two men to bring up the girl alone. Two men who hated each other, bringing this girl up together. And that was the focus for the story. And then, as I then discovered later on, there was something that happened in the future, beginning of the Second World War, that changed the whole perspective on the story again. I won't reveal that because that would spoil the story.
Yeah. But you talked about the storyline there, but earlier you talked about characters. So how do you write your novels? Do you create the characters first and then put a story to it, or do you develop a story and then find the characters?
Well, in this case, the characters were there, but I did invent one or two additional characters. I mean, a lot of the characters to the side of the main story were invented, but I invented a best friend. The daughter who's born is called Alice, and I invented a best friend for her because I needed her to have dialogues with somebody. It was only by talking to somebody else that I could get a sense of her emotional reaction to the things that were happening. So I invented a friend there. The other characters were real, but I had to invent their backstories. And in that sense, they took on a life of their own as I was writing. And this sounds a bit sort of fatuous, but sometimes I didn't know what they were going to say until I started writing it. I mean, this sounds a little bit overly creative, but it's what actually happened. I started writing. I found I could write for about 2 hours, and then I'd emerge from it and think, gosh, what has actually happened? And I'd go back through it. And I was slightly surprised by the conversations that these characters had had. And so it emerged out of that.
So do you actually, develop your ideas as you're writing, or do you sometimes they come to you in the bath, or I gather you take your dog for a walk every morning and you told me you don't look at the trees, you don't look at the flowers. This is where you think about ideas. Is that how it happens?
Yeah. I mean, the dog walking, I try and I set myself a challenge. I mean, you can waste a lot of time walking the dog, very charming time, lovely. But I try and set myself a challenge. I've got a script issue to sort out, some issue that I've got to resolve in the story. And so I try and set myself the challenge of solving that. So I try and use that time usefully. When I get back, I'm not a great planner. Some writers are. I mean, crime fiction writers are great planners, and they will sit down and they have storyboards and they have yellow stickers all over. Everything has to join up. I'm moving a bit more in that direction, and in the future I will be doing a lot more planning. But when I started, it was really me giving free rein to ideas. What that led to was a lot of rewriting. And if you write a first novel, I think you've got to be prepared to rewrite it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Because if you write in the way that I did, there'll be a lot of things that just don't work and you have to go back and put right. And so it's not writing one novel, it's actually writing about 5 novels.
Yeah, I know people who write it many, many times and still haven't got it published because they don't think they've got it right at all. I mean, can you be an indisciplined writer and just write when the mood takes you, or do you have to be disciplined? Do you have to develop a schedule?
No, you've got to be completely disciplined, because otherwise it won't happen. You can't just write when it feels appropriate. I mean, that was one of the things that bothered me about moving into retirement. I've always had a scheduled day. I tend to work 5 days a week. I tend to have my Saturdays and Sundays off, but I need to sit down and start working. And I was really worried that if I didn't do that, I would somehow start to fade away. So for me, this worked. I have a routine. It's not the same routine as the long hours we used to work years ago, Francis, but I sit down at 9:30. And when I'm writing, I fiddle around till 10. Then I write from 10 to 12. That's my 2 hours. And then I have my lunch, walk the dog. And then after that, I'm researching and planning. So I do 2 hours writing a day. And doing that, I can produce a book in 9 months, basically, with the revisions and so on.
I guess, being in the BBC does help you schedule yourself, because we had to do that. But, moving on, you had the motivation to write, you wanted to write, but you also had to get it published. So when you started writing, did you think, I just want to write, or did you think, how the hell am I going to get this out to people? How am I going to get it published?
Well, yes. I mean, when I started, I saw myself publishing as a traditional author. And I knew that the route publishers these days won't deal directly with authors. You have to go through literary agents, and you have to approach agents with your manuscripts. And I mean, when I started out, I read from some author that nobody in their right mind will sit down and write a book, because it's a soulless occupation trying to get it published. And when I started to go to the literary agents, that's exactly what I found. They have hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts drop on their desk every day. So yours is going to be something very out of the ordinary, or you need to be a celebrity. Celebrities are okay, they get published. But for the average person like me, exceedingly difficult. And after 6 months of trying, I thought, well, this is crazy. I've written this book, I want people to read it. And then I happened to come across, this is in 2012, something about self-publishing. And I didn't know anything about it then. And self-publishing was just taking off. Amazon had just created a platform where people who had written their own novels could publish them. Very strict guidelines about, how the content is arranged and the format is presented in and so on. And also, just at that time, a chap called Mark Dawson, who's quite a well-known crime fiction author, decided to start a course on marketing through social media. Because essentially, if you self-publish, there are a number of channels to market, but social media is one of the key ones. Facebook being perhaps.
Let's look at marketing in a minute. But self-publishing, I mean, if someone wants to self-publish like you did, I mean, how do they find out how to do it?
If you Google Amazon self-publishing, there will be a lot of information there from Amazon about literally there will be technical information about how to upload your book. But you need more information than that, because self-publishing is actually about running a small business. You produce your product, and then you have to market it. You have to take it to market yourself. Now, there are various gurus around who produce information and courses. There is one that I've just mentioned, this chap Mark Dawson, who produces a self-publishing course, which I invested in. It does cost money, it's not particularly cheap, but it takes you through every stage you need to know. And when you're trying to upload a book onto Amazon, there's a lot you need to know about the format for uploading, about the cover design. I mean, you've got to have a cover. Ebooks have covers, because that's how people recognize them on websites. So you have to decide, are you capable of designing your own cover? Will you get somebody else in to do that? Editing, I mean, it's highly recommended you get a professional editor in. I haven't done that, it costs quite a bit of money. I edit my own books, and I try really, really hard to concentrate, and I read them many, many times over. So there are different levels on which you can approach it.
Yeah, I mean, getting a proofreader is important. I mean, I wrote a book and it was published through an organization, but now when I read it, I see so many typos that it really worries me. So if you can get a proofreader, that's pretty vital, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, often friends can be proofreaders. I mean, I was, when I started writing, I was still working in my business, and a colleague proofread for me. That worked very, very well. One of the things that you're advised to do when you start out is to recruit a group of people who maybe buy your books early on and become your special team of readers who read your book before you publish, who effectively proofread for you. And they do it on the basis of a friendship, and you create a friendship club based around your writing. And that's one of the key aspects of self-publishing, actually. You create a readers list, because that readers list are people who like what you've written and are likely to buy your next book as well. And so
yeah, I was going to say, so how do you get these friends? Because I'm sure some of your real friends might not do all of that or even be good proofreaders. I'm a hopeless proofreader. But would you use that through social media? I mean, for example, could you use the Goodreads site, or you found a site, what is it? Wattpad, I can't remember. You told me about it, where you can write chapter by chapter and people can give you feedback and they become your friends.
Yep, that's right. There's one site called Wattpad, where you can write and put up your chapters as you develop them, and people will read your chapters and respond to you. So you get a lot of feedback from people, and that's really quite exciting, to be writing and to get people feeding back to you as you're writing. So I published my first book on Wattpad before I published it on Amazon, and I was overcome by the amount of feedback. I got over 10,000 reads. Now, this is not people paying for your book, because you've provided it free, but it's hugely good for the ego to have 10,000 people reading your book and feeding back to you, etc. So Wattpad, Wattpad, definitely Google that. It's great to do that. The readership there tends to be young, and I found from experience that my readership tends to be older, so the match wasn't terribly good. But sometimes, you know, I'd have youngsters say to me, you know, for old-fashioned writing, this is really good. I really enjoyed it. And I thought, oh, I didn't think it was old-fashioned writing. It was fairly contemporary. But anyway, so you get interesting feedback like that. But then when you move into marketing, and I do most of my marketing through Facebook, one of the options you have is to offer your book free of charge in return for somebody leaving their email address and subscribing to your club. So what you have is you have a simple website and you have a landing page, and when someone clicks on your advert to say, yes, I'd like to purchase this book or download this book, the landing page says, that's great, but would you be kind enough to register on my website and leave your email so that we can contact you again? They have the option of not doing that, and that way you can build up a readership list. It's amazing how many people will download a book if it's free, and they will also click to join your readership list as well. So that's one way you build up readers.
And what was your strategy for marketing using social media? How did you go about that?
Well, I did it the wrong way. Having written my book and felt really pleased with myself, I thought I jolly well want people to pay for this book. So I put it up and sold it. And yes, I did sell. But the real skill to make a success of self-publishing, you need follow-on books, because the best form of marketing is somebody finishing your first book and saying, I really enjoyed that. What happened next? And if you've got a link at the end of your electronic book, click on it, you've sold a book. So what you need to do is to give away your first book for free. It's called a magnet. But you can only give away your first book for free if you've got a second and a third and a fourth to follow. So it does mean that if you want to make a commercial success of self-publishing, you must commit to the long term. So you must be prepared to write follow-ups, maybe have 2 or 3 different series, because it's the cheapest way of marketing.
So when you discovered that, is that what motivated you to write your second, third and fourth book? Because maybe you'd like to tell us about that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, my second book was a mistake in the sense that it was a different strand, a different genre. It was another story I really wanted to tell. It was dying to get out. So as soon as I finished my first one, I set about the second one. It's a paranormal adventure, I realized as I was writing that the strategy was wrong and I should be writing sequels. So I now have a series of 3. It's called the, I'm trying to think of the name of the series, the Dynasty Series. It's there on the front of the book, the Dynasty Series, and there are 3 books in that. Then I have one other that stands alone. I have to write 2 more follow-ups, which I'm going to start on the next one very soon. So having written the wrong one, I then produced 2 follow-ups, and the style began to change. And even now, I think maybe I shouldn't have changed the style. I got driven by story. I thought I have to tell the story. The first book sits a lot in its location, and people say to me sometimes, I invented this place called Frampton. There actually is a place called Frampton. I didn't know there was at the time. And people say to me, Frampton is as much a character as the people in the book. And I think I need to go back and revisit that.
Okay, well, hold up that book in front of you so everyone can see it. Go and take that chance, like the old-fashioned captions before we had digital.
Guess Who Stayed.
That's a Guess Who Stayed.
The electronic version has a different cover, and that's because electronic marketing, electronic book marketing, relies heavily on linking the book to genre. Genre is a very strange concept. There are a number of different key genres: action, romance, paranormal, etc., etc. And the platforms that deliver your books need to know which genre you're in, which is a blinking nuisance because you often cross 2 or 3 different genres. And so I've forgotten where I started on this one. Anyway, you need to have an idea of your genre. And in that sense, you need to know who your market is. And you find out who your market is because when you're selling through Facebook, you get very detailed feedback on who's bought your books, their gender, their age, their location. So you do start to build up a good idea of who's buying your book and where your market is.
Okay, so you're clearly not in retirement, and you're having a very active life. Now, there may be people who would like to do what you've done and they find it rather daunting. What advice would you give them?
Well, one thing I'd say is it's become increasingly common to write novellas and not novels. Now, a novel is about 100,000 words and over. A novella could be 40 to 50,000 words. Now, on Amazon, a novel could sell for something in the region of £3 to £4. And as a writer, you get a 70% return. So, if you think numbers wise, I mean, 70% of £4, I'm not going to do that in my head. But anyway, it's not too bad, but you need to sell quite a lot of books for it to become a significant figure. And that's what social media should allow you to do. A novella, you probably wouldn't sell for much less, actually. You might sell for about £2.50. And so actually, for each novel, you could write 2 novellas, and you could build up a much quicker brand. I mean, some great writers in the past used to publish their novels in local journals and gradually created their novels like that. So not being daunted by the size of a full novel is one thing I'd suggest. The other thing I'd say is just sit down and do it. You don't know you can do it until you sit down and do it. So just do it. Sit down and enjoy it. Enjoy the process. If you don't enjoy it, don't do it. Go away, because it's really not worth doing if you don't enjoy it. But if you enjoy it, sit down, write, and at the end of it, then give it to your friends. Ask them what they think. Get some feedback from them. People are always impressed. Tell you one thing, Francis, I'm going on a bit, but I'll shut up in a minute. One thing I found, if you go out to dinner parties, meet friends, and people turn to you and say, "What do you do then?" Say, "Oh, I'm retired." And they say, "All right," and they've turned, they're talking to somebody else. If you say to them, "I'm an author," "You're an author? What do you do?" They say, "Well, I write books on action and romance." "Really? Can I buy them?" "Yes, of course you can." And you have a conversation going. So I have quite a big thing about identity in retirement. You need to have an identity. It's no good just being retired. You need to do something which is interesting that we can have a conversation about.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. But the other thing that's daunting in a way is that, if you're going down the self-publishing route, what you describe is you're not just a writer. You have to have a business plan. You have to be a businessman or woman. And that some people would find even more frightening than the writing.
You're absolutely right. You do need to have it about running a small business. And the only thing I'd say there is that start off with your sights low. Be excited by each reader that you get. I think that's somebody else who's actually read my book. I'm communicating. I'm doing what I set out to do. Gradually, you start to understand the process. I mean, the courses that I embarked upon with this Mark Dawson, when I first went through them, I did them mechanically and didn't understand a lot of what I was actually learning. I've gone back 3 or 4 times, and each time you realize the relevance of what you learned at that stage and how to apply it. So, I mean, it used to take me a week to create a Facebook ad. I can now do it in about 20 minutes, but try to understand, following the Facebook instructions, going through, there are 3 layers. You have a campaign, you set the parameters for your campaign, then you create the ad. Always made mistakes. It would kick me out, reject me. It would take me ages. Now I can knock them off in 20 minutes or so. So you learn that, but then of course you discover there's something else that's difficult. I mean, I'm just about to embark on advertising on Amazon because that's a very prolific site, but it's a whole different process. And just looking at it initially, I think, oh my goodness, here we go. But I'll do it, you know, and it'll be a skill which I learn.
Okay, well, I read your first book, and I must say the characters in the book stayed in my mind much longer than many other books, and you know, having that feedback, I'm sure, is helpful, and you like it when it comes from other people as well. So, you know, your next books, I'm looking forward to read at some point very soon. Anyhow, you know, we've come to the end of our sort of 30 minutes. And if people wanted to find out about your books, find out about you, learn more about what to do through your experience, where would they go?
Well, I've got a website which tells people about the 4 books and about me. That's www.rogerpenfound.com, so rogerpenfound.com. I've also got a Facebook page. Needs a bit of work on it, but that's rogerpenfound-author.com. And so there are links up there. I will soon be putting up my first video. I'm looking for something. My videos, my marketing strategy says, is there something an edge that I have that other people might not have? And like you, Francis, I can produce and edit video. So I've just voiced a sequence from The Guest Who Stayed and dramatically enhancing it. So that should be on the website within a week. So if anybody wants to have a look at that, then it'll be up there too.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Roger. I mean, we've come to the end of this now. And I mean, I think it's been a real interesting story of your journey, because not only because it's interesting because you've done it, because other people may want to do it as well. And I think they will have learned a lot from you about the journey you've taken and what they have to do. And you know, your advice, I think, about, you know, if you want to write, just do it, and then see where it takes you is really important. You know, so thank you for doing this, and I hope people will get in touch with you. I hope they read your books. I hope they review them, and I promise to do a review, and I will. So thank you for doing it, Roger. It's been a really interesting interview, and it's nice to see you on the other side of the camera instead of my side as well. Anyhow, thank you for doing it, Roger, and we'll end this interview now.